here's a theory I have as a clinical psychologist and relationship specialist. Having extremely high cognitive power, or IQ, is a version of neurodivergence that affects relationships and overall mental health hardcore. Like, it's not just that high IQ is commonly associated with certain neurodivergence, it is the neurodivergence. So a couple months ago, a close friend of mine and my husband's was staying with us from out of town. And he's known my husband since forever, and he's one of the first friends that my husband ever introduced me to, so we pretty much go way back. And that's all I'm going to say as far as identifying information here. But we were all having a couple drinks and we were talking casually, and this friend was like, so I went and got tested for ADHD to see what's up with my brain. So I totally missed the opportunity to attune to his vulnerability. And my dumbass response was, oh, let me guess, you didn't have ADHD, you just have a wildly high IQ, and that accounts for your issues. And my friend just looked at me and was like, yeah. Like a little baffled and a little, I don't know, like surprised that that was it and that this was such an obvious thing that I blurted it out, and maybe even confused, like, is my brain braining that much that it would be that different from everyone else and cause me these issues? So let me explain something about intelligence quotient, better known as IQ. I had to give these tests a lot in my training to become a psychologist. Pretty much every practicum and intern experience I had required me to do a ton of these exhaustive, boring ass tests. The real deal IQ tests are not like the stupid ones you see on the internet. They're very involved, and they include a ton of mini tests that go through all the different ways to measure cognitive ability. People criticize IQ because they say that it relies too much on vocabulary, and some people just haven't been exposed to certain concepts and topics. But if you think that's the case, you just take the verbal pieces out and give them something called a performance IQ, which requires no background knowledge. So I actually think it's a pretty awesomely exhaustive measure. There are subtests with spatial reasoning, using blocks, and your ability to verbally reason, answering why or how questions. You'll have to do simple things with numbers that seem simple, but make you keep like tons of things in your mind at the same time. There are picture exercises that require no words at all, that loosely weigh in on attentional abilities. So it really gives a good idea of the person's brain power. And then I just wanted to explain, here is the bell curve of IQ. The average IQ here is 100. That means that 50% of the population have an IQ over 100, and half of us have an IQ under 100. This is average. A standard deviation is 10 points. So if we get 3 standard deviations lower than the average, we're at 70. An IQ of 70 is someone who's so profoundly cognitively impaired that they have a hard time with basic life and self-care skills. They might be confused with things like folding clothes and the multi-step process of showering, let alone paying bills or even Googling something. 3 standard deviations from the mean means that only 2% of the population has this IQ or lower. And in the other direction, that would mean that 2% of the population have this IQ or higher. So the US Army doesn't use IQ anymore, but the test that they use roughly correlates with the minimum IQ kind of in the low 80s. So now let's look in the other direction. We have 3 standard deviations from the mean, so that puts us at 130, meaning only 2% of the population, like I said, have an IQ of 130 or higher. The difference between somebody who has profound deficits in even self-care and the average human is the same as the difference between the IQ of the average human and somebody who has an IQ of 130. Chances are, you guys, you don't know somebody with an IQ of 130 or above. The doctors that you and I know, I'd guess, are in the 120s. Big brain power. Learn stuff really easily, memorize stuff really easily. The people in the 130s, though, or above, are not doctors. Or if they are, they're bored. And if they're inching up into the 140s, almost zero chance of a traditional doctor or lawyer. You know, the regular Harvard grad that you assume is a genius. This person who's 140 is in the top 99 point something percentile. That means there's only a handful of people out of 1,000, not out of 100, that have that IQ. Most of us don't know any of these people, seriously, but I've actually met them in my career and I know them when I see them. And they have relationship problems and they're sometimes depressed, and they often have substance abuse issues if they're unsatisfied intellectually. Like if they're a regular doctor and not running 3 businesses, they're not feeling alive, they're understimulated, maybe feeling empty, and their brains work so differently, they often feel like they're making crazy, stupid mistakes or just being misunderstood or like not aligning with how the rest of the world wants things to be. They see everything as, how do I make sense of this? Not, how do I feel this? Just as a way that their brain works. So their partners are feeling alone and baffled, and their own relationships with themselves suffer too, because our identities and our inner worlds are not something that can just be made sense of. They have to be felt. And you know what? I think my friend is here. I'm not going to say what he does for a job, but let's just say he gravitates toward risk and complexity. These people are not the ones that studied hard at Yale. They might not even have gone to college. You saw Good Will Hunting with the How You Like Them apples. Well, this person might be so logical that they don't see the return on their investment if they go to college. I guess Elon Musk is probably approaching the mid 150s. And I'm not sure if someone like him is on the autism spectrum or if his IQ accounts for his symptoms. It does make me think. But anyway, these people, even in the 140s, if they did go to school, they're probably barely cracking the book, and they intuitively know the material after just hearing a tiny bit of it. They can look up the rest. They fill in the blanks themselves, and they're usually actually blowing off class and doing something they value more. They're not doctors or lawyers. They're starting crazy companies, like compulsively, or they drink or smoke weed to slow down the logical analysis like you wouldn't believe. And they don't understand how other people have these ways of thinking that stop to feel or enjoy something instead of understanding or solving something. But they're still human, so often they're lonely and feeling misunderstood, feeling isolated, because largely they are handful of people out of 1,000. So it's a cycle of more working or numbing that happens. And I always say, I think a lot of diagnoses are lacking. It's like if you say someone has borderline or bipolar, that's like saying your diagnosis is purple. But it's more helpful to say your diagnosis is red plus blue. And the red is usually an inborn brain thing, and the blue is usually a conditioned experience practice thing. I think the red in a lot of people might be ADHD or spectrum-ish in these cases. But my theory here, you guys, is it's often just plain IQ. And the doctors don't even see it because we don't see that many of these people to put the pattern together. So what are your thoughts, you guys?